questions came from Hickson Memorial Hall in Staffordshire. The presenter was Alex Forsyth, the producer Paul Martin, and it was a BBC Audio Bristol production. There's more live discussion just after the news at 9 when Matthew Sweet and his guests take eccentrics and outsiders as their topic on this week's Free Thinking. Before that, on Radio 4, a look back at some significant stories from the past.
5, 3, 2, 1.
This week in history.
Well, the police are going into charge now, and for the past few minutes, missiles, large bricks and other missiles, pieces of wood have been flying over here towards the police cordon, which is outside the Orgreave depot.
The Battle of Orgreave, a heated clash between striking miners and police officers, took place on the 18th of June 1984. Earlier that year, the National Coal Board had announced controversial plans to shut 20 UK collieries, causing at least 20,000 job losses. The National Union of Miners responded, and more than three-quarters of the UK's miners went on strike. Arthur Scargill, union president, the coking plant as a vital target for picketing. However, it was illegal for employees to picket beyond their own places of work, and so police had started gathering at the plant. Scargill called for a mass picket at the Orgreave site on the 18th of June. Eventually, close to 8,000 picketing miners were on site. Around 6,000 police officers, some on horseback, others with riot gear, formed a cordon around the plant. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, a convoy of lorries arrived to collect the coal, and miners pushed against police. After the lorries passed, police lines parted, and mounted officers charged into the field. Violence broke out, and more than 120 people were injured. 95 miners were arrested. However, their trials collapsed when police evidence was deemed to be unreliable. South Yorkshire Police did eventually pay £425,000 in damages to 39 miners who sued over assault, unlawful arrest, and malicious prosecution. The force did not admit wrongdoing, and no officers have faced misconduct proceedings or prosecution. Many involved say they still need answers about what happened and why.
In the early 1800s, animals were used for work, food and entertainment, and cruelty to animals was widely accepted. On the 16th of June 1824, 22 people decided to change that. They met at a London coffee shop and together formed the world's first animal welfare organisation, now known as the RSPCA. They included the politician Richard Martin, the anti-slave campaigner William Wilberforce, and the Reverend Arthur Broome. Early inspectors focused on enforcing Martin's Act, which was named after Richard Martin. It banned beating, abuse or ill treatment of cattle and other working animals. The society had uniformed officers on the streets investigating marketplaces and slaughterhouses. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was given permission by Queen Victoria to add the word royal to its name in 1840, and she also suggested adding a cat to the group's medal. The RSPCA's successes include stopping the last bullfight in England in 1870 and providing 13 animal hospitals during the First World War. While in its 200th year in 2024, the RSPCA responded to over 60,000 reports of animal suffering and helped to rehome over 26,000 pets.
A new age in modern computing began at 11 a.m. on the 21st of June 1948, when the world's first stored program computer was switched on. The small-scale experimental machine, known as the Manchester Baby, took up an entire room, weighed a ton, but had just 128 bytes of memory. In contrast, a smartphone today might have 64 gigabytes of storage, which is 500 million times as much. The baby's first task was answering a mathematical question, which it completed in 52 minutes, having run through 3.5 million calculations. Until this point, computers had been single process. The baby was the first computer which could perform different tasks and answer varied questions without being rewired, which could take days. One researcher on the project, Dr. Tommy Gordon Thomas, said Manchester at that time, just after the war, was full of smoke and dust, and it was a miracle we got things to work at all. Despite laying the foundation for computers as we know them, the baby was eventually dismantled. However, a working replica exists at the
You're listening to BBC Radio 4 on 198 kHz Longwave. This service is closing. BBC transmissions on this frequency will end on the 27th of June this year. However, you can continue to listen in many other ways. You can find BBC Radio 4 online via BBC Sounds. Radio 4 is available on DAB, digital radio, and through your digital television, including Freely. Radio 4 is also available via FM radio on 92 to 95 MHz and 103 to 105 MHz. Plus, you can listen via your smart speaker. Just say, play Radio 4. Information on how to listen can be found on the BBC website at bbc.co.uk/reception.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. The emergency services have been called to a train crash just south of Bedford. There are a number of casualties and air ambulance crews are at the scene. Peter Knapp was in the front carriage of one of the two trains that collided.
The middle 90% of each train looks fine. The end 5% of each one looks crumpled. What I thought was the third carriage looked like it was totally wrecked. But I think that was the train in front of us. But it looked like there was a big impact in the train that I was on the front carriage. I can't imagine what the situation of the driver is.
Footage from the scene shows the two damaged trains and dozens of passengers waiting in a neighbouring field. Two East Midlands railway services to London St Pancras were involved, the 440 from Corby and the 350 from Nottingham. Accident investigators are trying to establish what happened. Supporters of Andy Burnham say Sir Keir Starmer should set out a timetable to hand over the leadership in September to avoid jeopardising Labour's prospects in the Greater Manchester mayoral race. Mr Burnham will be sworn in as an MP on Monday after his resounding victory in the Makerfield by-election. The Prime Minister has said he'll stand if a leadership election is triggered. Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire a day after a day of intense hostilities. There are fears continuing fighting in Lebanon will undermine the peace deal between the United States and Iran. Lebanese media and rescue officials have reported several Israeli attacks since the deal was said to have come into effect. There's speculation that the King could be reunited with his grandchildren, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, after the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were offered royal accommodation for their visit to the UK next month. It's been 4 years since the children saw their grandfather in person. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. Now it's time for Free Thinking with Matthew Sweet.
Thank you, Ron. Hope, he declared early this morning from the platform in Makerfield. Hope. The candidate for the monster-raving loony party was not the victor in the by-election declared today, but he was standing next to him in a white Stetson, and his interjections made it into most of the news bulletins. Was he echoing Andy Burnham's message, or was howling Lord Hope just shouting his own surname? Hard to say. That Makerfield lineup, which also included Count Binface and a nature campaigner dressed as a fox, did seem to articulate something about the place of the eccentric, the outsider in British political and cultural life. Or should I say English? Listeners in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, you're probably off the hook here. English eccentricity is an idea that contains multitudes, from the cute to the radical to the dangerous. And there seems to be a special place in the English imagination for such figures who are on the fringes, but also somehow the bearers of a more authentic spiritual or intellectual tradition. Rooster Byron, the man in the caravan in Jez Butterworth's landmark play Jerusalem, is one of them. Also, the poet and mystic William Blake, who wrote the words that became Jerusalem, the hymn and an alternative national anthem. We're going to hunt these figures in the hedgerows, in the ditches, in the novel and in the polity. Tally-ho! So I think if we are going to discuss the eccentric, we might first ask, does it take one to know one? Let's meet the guests.